We are joined together out of tragedy, grief, and a call to action. We are moved by the Parkland survivors, like those with us today, David and Lauren Hogg, Brian and Matthew Dish, and Harris Jaffe, whose family was originally from Livingston. And we welcome you warmly, although we wish it was for different purposes. These young men and women were thrust into a tragedy, and they have turned their mourning into a movement. We are inspired by our own students who are here, Darcy and Zach, Mary, Campbell, Olivia, and Samantha, who are organizing next month's March for Our Lives, and they're here with us today. And if they're here, would you stand up a moment to be recognized? Once again, a weapon of mass murder was used to commit mass murder in American schools. Once again, everyone is shocked and saddened, but yet somehow not surprised. Once again, our hearts are heavy with the grief that becomes all too familiar. But we are not here simply to offer our thoughts and prayers once again. We're here because the students of Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School have started a movement to turn once again, in their own words, into never again. And we stand with them today, and we commit to them that we will fight to make sure that never again actually becomes a reality. Never again do we want students like David and Ryan and Matthew to witness their best friends and beloved teachers murdered with weapons of war. And never again do we want another news alert that says another gunman has opened fire in another school or church or nightclub or movie theater or campus or anywhere else. So I'm proud to be here with my fellow New Jerseyans who are speaking up by your presence, standing shoulder to shoulder with David and Ryan and Matthew and all 3,300 survivors at the Stoneman Douglas High School. And I'm proud to stand with them, and while I've always aspired to get a good grade, I am very proud of my lifetime F from the NRA because Here in New Jersey, we know that protecting families from senseless, preventable gun violence is not a political issue. It is not a partisan issue. It is a public safety issue. Unfortunately, too many of my colleagues in Washington fear a backlash from the NRA. Too many have put the interests of the gun lobby ahead of their responsibility to keep our families safe. The NRA may have 5 or 6 million members, but it does not speak for 320 million Americans who have a different view. We saw their unwillingness to act after hundreds of concert goers were shot in Las Vegas, and they refused to ban bump stocks that make mass shootings even more deadly. We saw it after first graders and teachers were murdered in Newtown, and they refused to close loopholes in our background check system. We saw it after bullets tore through a nightclub in Orlando, and they refused to even consider my own legislation to ban the sale of high-capacity magazines. How high must the body count climb before Congress puts the safety of our families ahead of the gun industry profits? Because if we're honest with ourselves, we know that it's not sportsmen and everyday gun owners who are bankrolling attack ads against lawmakers who support sensible gun laws. It's the gun industry, the manufacturers who made the weapons used to kill those students and teachers in Parkland that bankroll the NRA. And they have one agenda: to sell more guns, to sell more gun accessories, to sell more ammunition. And that includes the sale of high-capacity magazines. Now, I'm sure many of you, like I, watched the town hall held in South Florida last week, and it was exceptional to see these young men and women who were just coming out of a tragedy challenge their members of Congress. And I was encouraged to hear my colleague, Senator Marco Rubio, say he might consider limits on the size of magazines. High-capacity magazines are designed for one thing: high-capacity killing. It's what links Parkland to Newtown, and Las Vegas to San Bernardino, and Columbine to Orlando. And it's time for the madness to end. So I have here in my hands the legislation I introduced months ago to limit high-capacity magazines. It's called Keep America Safe Act. And tomorrow, when I head back to Washington, I'm going to challenge all of my colleagues to sign on as co-sponsors. It's time to ban high-capacity magazines. It's time to get weapons of war off our streets. And yes, it's time to reinstate the federal ban on assault weapons. I told these young men and women who are skeptical about people in public office, I understand that I voted for the assault weapons ban of 1994, and I co-sponsored the legislation to reinstate it in 2017. And I want to be perfectly clear what we're talking about when we talk about assault weapons. We're talking about semi-automatic assault-style rifles that are sold to the general public, but modeled after military-grade assault rifles our soldiers use on the battlefield. These guns are not designed for hunting. They're not designed for self-defense. They're not designed for protecting your home. These weapons and the high-capacity magazines used with them are designed for one thing: killing as many people as possible in as little time as possible. It's just one more reminder that if we want to turn once again into never again, we have to reject the NRA's talking points we hear time and time again. We can't let them get away with it anymore. We can't let them get away with saying, well, gun control doesn't work, look at Chicago, because we know that most of the guns in Chicago come from nearby states with looser gun laws. How is it that trafficking guns in our streets is not a federal crime? It should be. We can't let them get away. We can't let them get away with saying this isn't a gun issue, it's a mental health issue. Of course, mental health has to be part of our conversation and our solution. I've spent decades in the Congress fighting to make sure Americans get the care they need. But I cannot understand my colleagues who only talk about mental health in the aftermath of horrific massacres. The Congress just spent the past year in a crusade to take health care coverage, including, for the first time, widespread mental health coverage for all Americans, away from millions. In Florida, Governor Scott rejected the expansion of Medicaid. 1 million Americans in his state were left without any access to mental health care of any kind. And last year, the president signed a bill undoing Obama-era rules that required that more cases of severe mental illness be reported to the National Criminal Background Check System? Why would you reject reporting more cases of severe mental illness to the National Criminal Background Check System? That doesn't make any sense, but that's what we've done. We cannot let anyone get away with the NRA talking points anymore. We can't let them get away with saying that guns don't kill people. We can't let them get away with saying that guns don't kill people, that people kill people. Well, that's why we don't run background checks on guns. We run them on people, because we know that, in fact, that's who can't get the access. The problem is that at least 1 in 5 guns in this country are sold at gun shows and on the click of an internet without any background check at all. So we don't just need what some of my colleagues are calling for, which is more comprehensive background checks. We need universal background checks. We also need to require that background checks be completed before the guns are sold. The NRA is very proud that they passed a law that gives the FBI just 72 hours to complete a background check. And if they don't meet that deadline, the gun is sold anyhow. That means if the FBI discovers in the 73rd hour that someone has a violent past, they're too late. Meanwhile, the President's budget actually proposes slashing funding for the National Instant Criminal Background Check System by 16% in this next fiscal year. That's millions of dollars in grants intended for states to upgrade and improve the reporting of criminal records and severe cases of mental illnesses to the nationwide system. And that same budget also proposes eliminating the funding for the Department of Justice's Comprehensive School Safety Initiative. This funding helps bring educators and law enforcement and behavioral health professionals to develop sound school safety policies. Does that sound like something we should be zeroing out? Of course not. If anything, we need to expand and create new intervention programs so that when teachers and students or everyday citizens identify disturbing or threatening behavior, there's a protocol that's followed, that law enforcement, the family members, the mental health professionals are engaged when appropriate, and that ensures tips are followed up on. But to those who say the solution to school shootings is to arm our teachers, well, I haven't met many teachers who want to be the ones charged with assessing a threat, firing a gun, and taking a life in front of their own students. And let's remember that arming our teachers wouldn't do anything to stop the next Las Vegas or the next Orlando. The reality is the NRA's only answer to gun violence is more guns. But we already have more guns than people in the United States. We don't need more guns. As Americans, we treasure our freedoms, and we are proud of being, all in all, a safe and free country. And make no mistake, throughout my career, I'm proud to have secured millions of dollars in federal COPS funding that many New Jersey communities have used to have school resource officers in their schools. But so long as the bad guys are able to get their hands on AR-15s, a police officer at every school is not enough to stop someone armed with multiple 30-round magazines. So I say that unless police officers are going to start teaching geometry, we should strive to let our teachers do what they do best, and that's teach our children. There is one last thing. There's one last thing I want to call to your attention. Allies of the NRA are also advancing legislation known as concealed carry reciprocity. Now, no matter how, well, I'm glad to see you know what I'm talking about. So, no matter how nice it may sound, here's what it means. Here in New Jersey, we have strict requirements for concealed carry permits. Virtually impossible to get one. But some states allow just about anyone, teenagers, domestic abusers, you named it, to get a concealed weapon. Concealed carry reciprocity, which some of my colleagues are demanding we pass in return for improving background checks, would let those from states with less stringent laws to bring their concealed weapons to New Jersey. Now, I've heard a lot about state rights, but all of a sudden this state right doesn't count. We want to keep our concealed carry provisions in New Jersey law exactly how it is. Concealed carry reciprocity would take New Jersey's right to enforce its own gun laws. Why should anyone from another state with lax requirements be able to come into this sanctuary and carry a concealed weapon? We do not need that in New Jersey, and as far as I'm concerned, we don't need it in the country as well. So, let me close by saying, and I was discussing this with these young men and women, but they are driven. I can see it in their eyes. I can see it in their words. I can see it in their passion. But we have to join in that passion. Make no mistake, we have our work cut out for us. The change we need won't happen immediately. However, standing here with all of you, I feel hopeful that for the first time in a long time, that things can be different. And it's thanks to students like David and Ryan and Matthew and their classmates and their teachers and their parents who are speaking up. The people of Parkland have pricked the conscience of the country. And I hope of the leaders in Washington who have become accustomed to shrugging off mass shootings instead of stopping mass shootings. So I want to thank you for speaking out, because I really believe this may be the moment and the opportunity We can only imagine the pain that you have been through. But clearly you're very brave and you're very strong. It's time we call on everyone in Washington, Democrats and Republicans alike, to be braver, to be stronger, just like the students of Stoneman Douglas High School. We cannot let the gun industry's fear tactics paralyze Congress, or let our gun violence epidemic fade from the news headlines, or let apathy in Washington again lead us to inaction. That's why we're here today, to say this time it will be different, that we will not take no for an answer. We must never give in to the twisted logic that says we can't stop people from buying weapons of mass murder and then committing acts of mass murder. We must refuse to believe that in the greatest democracy in the world, we, the people, are powerless in the face of this carnage. We are not powerless. And when we, the people, stand together, there is no force more powerful than we, the people. So when the NRA says that gun violence is inevitable, we stand with the students of Parkland and say, never again. When we hear that Congress is just too polarized, just too dysfunctional to take any action, we demand and we say never again. And if those who do the bidding of the NRA in our legislatures refuse to take action, then we, the people, will go to the polls and we will say never again to you as well. Thank you for being here. This is just the beginning of a fight. We must be persistent. We cannot let the passage of time be our enemy. We will march on, we will protest on, we will boycott on, and we will vote on so that the NRA and those who blindly follow them will be engulfed in a tsunami of the will of the American people, and we can create change.